Some people will eat every meal you cook for them and still tell you you are not giving enough. Remember that. I am Harold Sutter, 68 years old, retired chef, 35 years behind a stove, and the kind of man who believed that feeding people was the same as loving them, right up until the evening my son's wife pushed away the plate I had just made, looked me dead in the eyes, and told me to hand over everything I had ever saved, or never sit at that table again. I want you to stay with me here, because what happened next changed everything. Welcome back. Get comfortable, settle in, and remember, the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the decent thing. They just chose not to. Leave a comment and make sure you subscribe. You are going to want to be here for this one. Let me tell you about that evening. It was a Tuesday. I had spent 3 hours making beef stew. Not just any beef stew. Diane's beef stew. My late wife's recipe, the one she had perfected over 26 years of marriage, the one that filled our little house on Calhoun Street with a smell so specific that even now, 3 years after losing her, I could close my eyes and almost believe she was standing behind me, adjusting the oregano the way she always did, saying, "A little more, Harold. You always hold back on the oregano." I did not hold back that evening. I put my whole heart into that pot, the way I had put my whole heart into every single meal I had cooked in my son Keith's house for the past 10 months. 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. That is roughly 900 meals if you are counting. And I promise you, nobody in that house was. I set the table. I ladled the stew into bowls. I placed the bread on the cutting board, the good bread. The sourdough I had driven 20 minutes to the bakery on King Street to buy because Keith once mentioned he liked it. I poured the water. I folded the napkins. I sat down. Keith sat to my left. Vanessa, his wife, sat directly across from me, and before I could pick up my spoon, Vanessa pushed her bowl forward about 2 inches, folded her hands on the table the way someone does when they have been rehearsing a speech in the mirror for a week, and said, "Harold, we need to have a conversation about the financial situation in this house." I set my spoon down slowly. "What financial situation?" I said. "I buy my own groceries. I cook every meal. I fixed the garbage disposal last Thursday and the porch light the week before that. What exactly needs discussing?" She did not blink. Not once. "You live here without contributing," she said. "No rent, no utilities, no investment in this household. And you are sitting on over $200,000 in savings. Now, I want you to notice something." She knew the number. Not a rough estimate. Not a ballpark. She knew it precisely. Which means my son, my own son, had told her exactly what I had in the bank. I looked at Keith. He was staring at his stew like it contained the answers to questions he did not want to be asked. I kept my voice level. "That money is my retirement, Vanessa. That is what Diane and I saved over 30 years. Early mornings, double shifts, holidays I worked so other people could be home with their families. And this house," she said, spreading her hands like she was presenting a property listing, "is what Keith and I maintain every single month. So here is what we are proposing. You contribute $130,000 toward the mortgage. Consider it a household investment." I stared at her. The kitchen was so still. I could hear the stew simmering on the stove behind me. The recipe my dead wife had taught me, bubbling quietly in a pot while her son's wife asked me to hand over my life. Or Vanessa added, and I want you to understand that she said this without a single tremor in her voice, "You find somewhere else to live, and do not come back to this table." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. The kind you can feel pressing against your chest. I looked down at the bowl she had pushed away. The stew I had spent 3 hours making. Diane's recipe. The oregano I had not held back on. And I understood something in that moment that took 68 years to fully arrive. I had been feeding people who were not hungry for what I was actually offering. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not beg. I stood up slowly, walked to the sink, washed my hands the way I have washed them 10,000 times after a shift, thorough, deliberate, like a man who respects the work, even when the work is done. I reached for the apron hanging on the hook by the stove, the apron Diane had given me for my 50th birthday. White cotton with a coffee stain on the left side that I had never been able to get out and never wanted to. I folded it. Carefully, the way you fold something that matters. I placed it on the counter. Vanessa watched me. Keith watched his bowl. Neither of them said a word. I walked to my room. I heard Vanessa call after me. "Harold, we should finish this conversation." But I had already decided the conversation was over. Some conversations end when the last word is spoken. That one ended when the plate was pushed away. I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to scare me after Diane passed, but now felt like the only honest sound in the house. I picked up her photograph from the nightstand, the one from our anniversary trip to Savannah, the one where she is laughing at something I said that I cannot remember anymore, but her laugh, that I remember perfectly. I held it with both hands. "Looks like it is time to cook somewhere else, sweetheart," I said. And I swear, if you listen closely enough to a photograph of someone who loved you, you can almost hear them answer. What I heard was Diane's voice, calm and certain, and just a little bit amused, the way she always sounded when she knew I was about to do something right. She said, "It is about time, Harold." I set the photograph down gently, and I began to plan. But before I tell you what I did next, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to the day I lost her. And the day I made the decision that led me to that table, that stew, and that plate being pushed away. Because you need to understand something. I did not arrive at that kitchen table by accident. I arrived there because I loved my son. And sometimes, love is the thing that walks you straight into the room where they break your heart. Stay with me. Diane passed on a Thursday morning in October. Heart failure. The doctors used longer words for it, but that is what it was. Her heart, the one that had loved me and Keith and a 28-year-old kitchen on Calhoun Street with equal and ferocious devotion, simply decided it had done enough. I was holding her hand when it happened. I want you to know that. Whatever else this story contains, whatever comes next, I was holding her hand. The last meal I ever cooked for her was 2 days before. In the hospital. Chicken broth, homemade, carried in a thermos because hospital food is an insult to anyone who has ever held a wooden spoon with purpose. She took one sip, smiled at me, and said, "Too much salt, Harold." She had not eaten in 3 days. She could barely lift the cup, and she still had notes on my seasoning. That was Diane, honest until the very last spoonful. She did not finish the broth. I sat beside her and finished it myself, because wasting it felt like giving up, and I was not ready for that yet. But Thursday morning came regardless. At the funeral, Keith sat beside me. He is my only child. 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with Diane's eyes, and my habit of going quiet when things get heavy. He held my shoulder, firm, the way a man does when he is trying to be the strong one and is not entirely sure he can manage it, and said, "Dad, you are not going through this alone. Move in with us. We have the space." I believed him. I want you to understand that. I did not hesitate. Did not weigh the options, did not consult anyone. My son asked me to come home with him, and I said yes. Because that is what you do when your wife dies, and your boy reaches out his hand. You take it. I sold the house on Calhoun Street. 28 years of marriage inside those walls. The kitchen where Diane had taught me her beef stew recipe on a rainy Sunday in 1993. The porch where I had sat every morning with my coffee, listening to the neighborhood wake up. The bedroom where I had held her hand on the nights when her breathing got shallow and we both pretended not to notice. I did not take much. A few boxes of clothes, Diane's photograph, A small wooden box of spices, the ones she had collected over the years, labeled in her handwriting, cumin and coriander, and smoked paprika, and that oregano she always insisted I use more of. My apron. My knife set. The professional one. 30 years of edges and memories, wrapped in a leather roll. And $221,000 in savings, built over 3.5 decades of 5 in the morning. Alarms and grease burns and holiday shifts, and the kind of work that leaves your hands rough and your back sore, and your bank account just barely sufficient if you are careful. Enough for long enough. I moved into Keith and Vanessa's spare room on a Monday in January. It was a fine room. Clean. A window that faced the backyard. A bed that was not mine but was perfectly comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when they belong to someone else and you are simply being allowed to use them. And for the first 10 months, things were fine. I need you to sit with that word for a moment. Fine. Because fine is the most dangerous word in the English language. Fine is the sound a bridge makes right before it collapses. Fine is what the soup tastes like when you forgot to season it but nobody wants to say so. Fine is the distance between two people sitting at the same table who have stopped reaching for each other. Here is what fine looked like. I woke up every morning at 5:30 because 35 years of kitchen work had permanently rearranged my internal clock. I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, fresh coffee, sometimes pancakes on Sundays if I was feeling generous, which I usually was, because generosity was the only language I had left. I set the table. I poured the juice. I waited. Keith would come downstairs, take his plate, say, "Thanks, Dad," and eat standing at the counter while scrolling through his phone. Vanessa would come down 10 minutes later, take her coffee, occasionally nod in my direction, and leave for work without sitting down. I made lunch for myself. I made dinner for all three of us. Every single night. I planned the meals, bought the groceries with my own money, prepped, cooked, plated, served, and cleaned up. 900 meals in 10 months. Give or take. Nobody ever once asked me what I wanted to eat. I also fixed things. The garbage disposal in September. The leaking pipe under the bathroom sink in November. The porch light that had been flickering since before I moved in. The squeaky hinge on the bedroom door that Vanessa had complained about to Keith 3 times without Keith ever picking up a screwdriver. I fixed them all. Quietly. Without being asked. Without being thanked. Because that is what I do. I cook, and I fix things. That is how Harold Sutter says I love you. With a wooden spoon and a wrench, and the quiet certainty that showing up matters even when nobody notices. But here is the thing about showing up for people who do not notice. It works for a while. It works for months. Even. You can sustain it on discipline and habit. And the memory of your dead wife saying, "Harold, family is the only recipe that matters." You can pour yourself into meals and repairs and small daily acts of love that go unacknowledged, and you can call it fine, and you can mean it, mostly. Until you cannot. The fine started cracking around month 7. Vanessa stopped nodding when she came downstairs. She started leaving her dishes in the sink without rinsing them, which, if you have ever worked in a professional kitchen, you understand is not a small thing. It is a statement. It says, "Someone else will deal with this." It says, "Your labor is invisible to me." By month 9, dinners had become silent. Not the comfortable silence of people who have said everything they need to say, but the heavy, pressurized silence of people who have a great deal to say and have decided, for different reasons, not to say any of it. Keith stopped saying, "Thanks, Dad." He just took his plate, and I kept cooking. Because I did not know how to stop. Because stopping felt like admitting that the meals did not matter. And if the meals did not matter, then what exactly was I doing in that house? That question sat in my chest like an undigested stone for weeks. And then, on a Tuesday evening in late February, my daughter-in-law answered it for me. She pushed away the plate. And everything I had been calling fine for 10 months finally fell apart completely. Now, I told you what happened at that table. I told you about the apron and the photograph and Diane's voice saying, "It is about time, Harold." What I have not told you yet is what I did next, because I did not storm out that night. I did not make a single phone call. I did not raise my voice or pack a bag or do anything that a man makes decisions about at midnight. I waited 3 days. And in those 3 days, something very important happened. The kitchen went silent. Stay with me. I did not cook breakfast on Wednesday morning. That may not sound significant to you, but I need you to understand what it meant. I had not skipped a morning meal in 35 years. Not when I had the flu in 2004. Not when Diane was in the hospital. Not when my knees were so bad I had to hold the counter just to stand. Cooking was not a hobby for me. It was not a pastime. It was a pulse. And on Wednesday morning, for the first time in 35 years, the pulse stopped. I stayed in my room until 8. Then I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, and walked back. The stove was cold. The counter was clean. The pots were untouched. I left the apron exactly where I had folded it the night before, on the counter beside the stove, like a letter nobody had opened. I did not survive 35 years in professional kitchens by burning a dish the moment someone insulted it. A good chef does not react. A good chef adjusts. A good chef waits until the heat is right, and then moves with precision. That is what I was doing. Adjusting. Keith came downstairs at 7:45. I know because I heard his footsteps stop in the kitchen doorway. He stood there for what I estimated was about 12 seconds, which is long enough to notice an empty stove but not long enough to do anything about it. He made himself a bowl of cereal. I heard the spoon against the ceramic. He left for work without knocking on my door. Vanessa left at 8:15. The front door closed with the particular firmness of someone who has nothing to say and wants you to hear it. The house was empty. And the kitchen, for the first time since I had moved in, was completely, entirely silent. I sat on my bed and thought about Diane. Not the sick Diane, not the hospital Diane, but the Diane who stood beside me in our kitchen on Calhoun Street on a Sunday afternoon in 2009, watching me refuse to leave a failing risotto, and said, very calmly, "Harold, a good chef knows when to leave the kitchen. Not every meal is yours to save." I had not understood her then. I thought she was talking about rice. She was not talking about rice. Wednesday passed. I did not cook. I ate a sandwich from the groceries I had already bought, in my room, alone, which felt like a protest and a grief at the same time. Keith came home. I heard him open the refrigerator, close it, open it again, as if the contents might have changed in the 3 seconds between attempts. He ordered pizza. I smelled it through my door and felt nothing. Thursday morning. Day 2. I woke at 5:30. Because the clock inside me does not care about emotional decisions. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes. Then I got up, took my phone, and called Tommy Ferrara. Tommy had been my sous chef at La Maison on East Bay Street for 11 years. He is the kind of man who communicates primarily through insults and acts of loyalty, so profound they make you uncomfortable. He picked up on the second ring. Harold Sutter. Calling me before 6 in the morning. Someone better be dead, or you better be cooking something extraordinary. Neither, I said. I need a realtor. A pause. Tommy is not a man who pauses often, so when he does, it carries weight. You buying or selling? He said. Buying, I said. Something small. Something mine. Another pause. I know a woman. Beverly Ann Claiborne. She found me my place after the divorce. No nonsense, no small talk. Gets it done. I will send you her number. Thank you, Tommy. Harold. Yeah. Whatever happened, you are going to be fine. And I mean actually fine. Not the kind of fine you have been pretending to be for the last year. I almost smiled. Almost. How did you know? Because I have known you for 23 years. And you have never once called me before 6 unless something broke. And I do not think we are talking about a garbage disposal. He sent Beverly Ann's number before I had finished brushing my teeth. I called her at 8. She was, as Tommy had promised, no nonsense. I told her what I needed. Small. 2 bedrooms. A good kitchen. Within 30 minutes of downtown Charleston. She asked my budget. I told her. She said she would have listings by the end of the day. By Thursday afternoon, 4 addresses sat in my inbox. I looked at each one the way a chef looks at ingredients. Not for what they are, but for what they could become. 3 of them were acceptable, clean, functional. The kind of places where you could live a perfectly ordinary life without complaint. The 4th one was on Bayberry Lane. I did not know that yet. I did not know what Bayberry Lane would come to mean, but I looked at the photograph of that kitchen, the wide window above the sink, the light falling across the counter in the late afternoon the way light falls when it is trying to tell you something, and I felt a pull I had not felt since the last time Diane laughed in our kitchen on Calhoun Street. Not happiness. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that did not have a name but felt like the first breath after being underwater for a very long time. Possibility. I closed my phone. I set it on the nightstand beside Diane's photograph. I think I found one, I said to her. She smiled back at me from Savannah, permanent and patient. On Thursday evening, Keith knocked on my door. Softly. The kind of knock that is really a question. Dad, you okay? I looked at the door. My son. Diane's boy. The man who had sat at a table and watched his wife push away my stew and said nothing. I am fine, Keith, I said. Fine. That word again. But this time, for the first time, I was using it on purpose. Not as a bridge, as a wall. Because on the other side of that wall, I had 4 listings and a plan and the quiet, steady certainty that I was about to do something Diane would have approved of. 1 kitchen. That was all I needed. 1 kitchen that was mine. Stay with me. Friday afternoon, I drove to Bayberry Lane. Beverly Ann Claiborne met me at the curb. She was exactly what Tommy had described. Mid-50s. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck, handshake like a woman who had closed 900 deals and did not intend to waste your time on number 901. Mr. Sutter, she said. The one with the good kitchen is last on the list. I saved it on purpose. Why? I said. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. Because if I showed it to you first, you would not bother with the other 3. And I am thorough. She was right. We walked through 3 houses that afternoon. Each one was fine. There is that word again. Fine kitchens, fine bedrooms, fine yards. The kind of places where you could microwave a frozen dinner and watch television and call it a life without anyone arguing the point. Then we pulled onto Bayberry Lane. I need you to stay with me here. Because I am going to describe this street the way it deserves to be described, which is the way you describe a place that saved your life without asking for anything in return. Bayberry Lane is a quiet residential street on the east side of Charleston, about 12 minutes from downtown if you catch the lights right. It is lined with crepe myrtle trees that bloom pink and white in the summer and stand bare and dignified in the winter like old men who have stopped trying to impress anyone. The houses are modest, single-story mostly. Porches with rocking chairs. Yards with actual grass, not the decorative kind, the kind that gets mowed on Saturday mornings by people who wave at you when you drive past. The house was at the end of the block. A 1-story, 2-bedroom bungalow with cream-colored siding that needed a fresh coat and a front porch with 2 steps and a screen door that creaked when Beverly Ann pushed it open. The yard was overgrown. The back fence leaned slightly to the left, like it had reached an agreement with gravity and decided not to fight it anymore. Beverly Ann walked me through the bedrooms, the bathroom, the living room. She pointed out the new roof, the updated electrical. She mentioned the previous owners had been transferred to Atlanta in a hurry, which explained the price. Then she opened the kitchen door, and I stood there. The kitchen was not large by restaurant standards, but by the standards of a 68-year-old man who had just spent 10 months cooking in someone else's space, it was everything. Wide counter. Along the back wall. Gas stove, 4 burners, the kind with iron grates that mean business. A window above the sink, wide and tall, and through it, the late afternoon sun was pouring in across the counter, like liquid gold, like the room itself was trying to show me what it could do if I gave it a chance. I walked to the window. Looked out. A backyard with overgrown grass and a jasmine bush along the fence that I could smell even through the glass. The fence between this yard and the next one was wooden, about chest height. The kind you could lean over and have a conversation with your neighbor if you were the sort of person who did that. I put my hands on the counter. The surface was cool. Solid. I pressed down. The way you test something to see if it will hold your weight. It held. "I will take it," I said. Beverly Ann, to her credit, did not blink. "You have not seen the garage," she said. "I do not need a garage," I said. "I need this kitchen." She studied me for a moment. Then she smiled, small and professional but real underneath it. "Cash offer? No contingencies?" she said. "Cash offer. No contingencies." She called me back in 2 hours. I was sitting in the car in a parking lot off Meeting Street, eating a sandwich I had bought from a deli, because I still was not ready to cook in a kitchen that was not mine yet. My phone rang. "Mr. Sutter," Beverly Ann said. "It is yours. I want you to hold on to that word. Yours. Because at 68 years old, after selling the house you shared with your wife, after living in your son's spare room for 10 months, after watching your daughter-in-law push away the meal you had made with your dead wife's recipe and tell you to hand over your savings or leave, the word yours does something to your chest that is difficult to explain. It opens something that had been locked shut for so long you had forgotten it was a door. I sat in that parking lot and held my phone against my chest and breathed. Then I drove back to Keith's house. He was in the kitchen, standing at the counter eating leftover Chinese takeout from a paper container. The stove was cold. It had been cold for 3 days. My apron was still folded on the counter where I had left it. Nobody had moved it. Nobody had even noticed it enough to move it. "I found a place," I said. "I will be out by the end of the month." Keith turned around slowly. The container was still in his hand. He looked at me, the way you look at someone who has just said something you heard perfectly, but need a moment to believe. "Dad," he said. "I am not angry," I said. And I meant it. Anger would have been easier, honestly. Anger gives you something to hold. What I felt was quieter than anger. It was the sound of a pot being taken off the stove. The burner clicking off. The heat going out of something that had been simmering for too long. "Tanya did not mean it like that," he said. I looked at my son. This man I had taught to crack an egg when he was 6 years old, standing on a step stool in our kitchen on Calhoun Street with Diane beside him, laughing because he got more shell in the bowl than egg. This man I had driven to his first job interview, pressed his shirt for him, waited in the parking lot for 45 minutes because he was nervous and I did not want him to feel alone. This man who had watched his wife push away my plate and said nothing. "Keith," I said quietly. "She said it over the meal I cooked. Over the dish your mother taught me. The one I spent 3 hours on. For this family. In this kitchen. We both know what she meant." He looked at his takeout container. He did not look up. I went to my room, and I started packing. Moving day was a Saturday in early March. Cold. The kind of cold that Charleston gets once or twice a year, just enough to remind you that it can. The kind that sits on your shoulders like a hand that is not unfriendly but is not warm either. Tommy pulled into the driveway at 6 in the morning in his 1998 Ford pickup, the same truck he had driven since the day he left La Maison, the same truck that smelled permanently of garlic and motor oil, which Tommy claimed were the 2 essential ingredients of a good life. He stepped out, looked at the house, looked at me standing on the front porch with a coffee mug in my hand and said, "You look like a man who has already made peace with something. That is either very good or very dangerous." "Both," I said. Good, he said. Let us get your things. My things. I want to tell you about my things, because what a man takes when he leaves tells you everything about who he is. 4 boxes of clothes. Nothing special. The kind of a tired chef accumulates, mostly comfortable, mostly stained in places that do not wash out, mostly adequate. Diane's photograph. The one from Savannah. I wrapped it in a dish towel and placed it in a box marked kitchen, because that is where she belonged. In the kitchen. She always belonged in the kitchen. The spice box. Small, wooden, the size of a shoebox. Diane had started it in 1995. Each jar was labeled in her handwriting. The kind of handwriting that school teachers used to have. Precise and slightly slanted to the right. Cumin, coriander, smoked paprika, turmeric, star anise, and oregano. The one she always said I held back on. The jar that was half empty, because I had been using it faithfully in every beef stew I made since the day she died, trying to get the amount right, trying to hear her voice saying, "A little more, Harold." The apron. I picked it up from the counter where I had folded it 4 days ago. Nobody had moved it. 4 days on that counter, and not one person in that house had picked it up, or hung it back on the hook, or asked me why it was there. I folded it again, tighter this time, and placed it in the box with Diane's photograph. They belonged together. And the knives. My knife set. 30 years old. 8 knives in a leather roll that Diane had bought me for our 10th anniversary from a shop in Savannah. And I'm going to tell you about them because they deserve it. The chef's knife. The one I had used every single day for 3 decades. The handle was worn smooth on the right side where my thumb sat. That knife had cut more onions than I could count. And I swear it knew the difference between a Tuesday dinner and a Sunday celebration. The fillet knife. I bought that one myself the week Diane told me she was pregnant with Keith. I do not know why. Something about finding out you are going to be a father makes you want to own a very precise knife. I have never been able to explain it. The bread knife. Diane's favorite. She used it on everything. Bread, tomatoes, cheese. Once a piece of rope in the backyard that she could not find scissors for. I told her she was going to ruin the serration. She told me serration was not the point of life, Harold. And that made no sense at all. And also somehow made perfect sense. I wrapped each knife individually. Rolled the leather case. Placed it in the box. 30 years of edges and memories, packed in under 2 minutes. Then I did something I had not planned. I walked into the kitchen one last time. The stove was cold. It had been cold for 4 days now, the longest that stove had gone unlit since I had moved in. I looked at the counter, where I had chopped and sliced and plated 900 meals that nobody asked for and nobody thanked me for. I opened the cabinet above the stove, the one where I had organized the spices when I first moved in, alphabetical. The way Diane taught me. The shelf was mostly empty now. My spices were in the box by the front door, but I took 1 jar out of my spice box. Oregano. Diane's oregano. The one I always held back on. I placed it on the empty shelf, in the center, label facing out. I did not leave a note. I did not explain. If they ever found it, they would not understand what it meant. But I would know. And Diane would know. And sometimes, that is enough. I closed the cabinet door quietly and walked out of that kitchen for the last time. We loaded the truck in 2 hours, Tommy and I. He did not ask questions. He lifted boxes, made one comment about my book collection being heavier than his first marriage, and worked steadily the way men do when they understand that the job is not about the boxes. Vanessa stayed in the master bedroom the entire time. I heard the television through the door. She did not come out. She did not say goodbye. I did not knock. Keith carried 1 box to the truck. 1. Then he stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets, watching me load the rest. He looked like a man standing on a dock watching a boat leave, wanting to call out but not knowing which words would be the right ones. When the truck was loaded, I walked through the house one final time. Every room. The spare bedroom that had been mine for 10 months. The bathroom I had fixed the pipe in. The living room where I had sat alone on evenings while Keith and Vanessa watched television in their room. I touched nothing. I just looked. Then I walked to the driveway. Tommy was already in the truck with the engine running. Keith was still standing there, hands still in his pockets. "You did not have to do this, you know," he said. I climbed into the passenger seat, put on my seatbelt, looked at my son through the open window. I thought about the eggs, the step stool, Diane laughing, the shell in the bowl. 38 years of loving this man standing in a driveway who could not find the words to ask me to stay and could not find the courage to ask his wife to apologize. "Neither did she," I said. Tommy pulled out of the driveway. I did not look back. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left in that direction that I needed to see. The last thing I took from that house was the apron. Not because I needed it, because they clearly did not know what it was worth. Stay with me. Because what happened next, on a quiet street on the east side of Charleston, with a creaky screen door and a kitchen full of afternoon light, changed everything. Here is something nobody tells you about starting over at 68. It does not feel like starting over. It feels like finally arriving. But I am getting ahead of myself. Tommy helped me unload the boxes in 40 minutes. He set the last one on the kitchen counter, looked around the empty house, and said, "It needs work." "Everything worth having does," I said. He pointed at the stove. "Gas, 4 burners, iron grates. That is a serious stove, Harold." "I know." He nodded slowly. The way Tommy nods when he approves of something but refuses to say it directly. "I will check on you next week," he said. "Do not do anything interesting without calling me first." Then he shook my hand, climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving behind the faint smell of garlic and motor oil and 23 years of friendship that never once required an explanation. I stood in the kitchen alone. The first thing I did was open the spice box. I placed it on the counter beside the stove, opened the lid, and looked at Diane's handwriting on the labels. Cumin, coriander, smoked paprika, star anise. The oregano jar was missing, of course. I had left it on an empty shelf in a kitchen that no longer wanted me. But the rest were here. The rest were mine. The second thing I did was hang the apron. There was a hook beside the kitchen window, the kind of simple brass hook that someone had installed years ago for a purpose I could only guess at. I hung the apron there. White cotton, coffee stain on the left side. It looked right. It looked like it had been waiting for that hook. The third thing I did was unwrap Diane's photograph. I placed it on the nightstand in the bedroom, facing the door, so that she would be the first thing I saw when I walked in and the last thing I saw before I turned off the light. "We made it, sweetheart," I said. She smiled at me from Savannah. Permanent. Patient. Present. Then I walked back to the kitchen, filled a pot with water from the tap, which dripped slightly, another thing to fix, and boiled it for coffee. 1 cup. 1 mug. One man standing at the counter of his own kitchen looking out through the wide window at a backyard he had never seen before, watching the last light of a March evening settle into the grass and the jasmine bush and the slightly leaning fence between his yard and the next. And the silence. I need to tell you about the silence. Because it was not the silence of Keith's house, which was the silence of people coexisting without connecting. It was not the silence of the hospital room where Diane stopped breathing, which was the silence of something ending. This silence was different. This silence had room in it. It had space for a thought to stretch out and breathe without bumping into someone else's expectation or disappointment or demand. The silence was not empty. It was spacious. I drank my coffee slowly. I did not turn on the television, because I did not own a television, and was not sure I intended to buy one. I did not play music. I just stood there. And for the first time in 3 years, I was not performing for anyone, not cooking to prove my worth, not fixing things to justify my presence, not being fine. I was just Harold, in a kitchen, with a cup of coffee. And that was enough. That first night, I made myself dinner, scrambled eggs, and toast. The simplest meal in the world. The kind of meal that most people would not even consider a meal. But I took out my chef's knife and diced an onion. Finally, the way I had diced 10,000 onions before it. I cracked the eggs into a bowl, 3 of them, and whisked them with a fork the way Diane used to. Not the way they teach you in culinary school, the way a woman who loves eggs and does not care about technique whisks them, vigorously and without apology. I cooked them in butter over low heat, because scrambled eggs are a test of patience, and I had 68 years of it. I toasted the bread. I plated it on a real plate, not a paper plate, not a takeout container. I set it on the table with a cloth napkin, because I am a chef. Even when the only customer is me, especially when the only customer is me, I ate slowly. The eggs were good. The toast was fine. The silence was extraordinary. I washed my plate, dried it, put it away. Then I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had slept in a year. The next 4 days, I did what I do. I fixed things. Day 1. The kitchen faucet. It dripped every 9 seconds, which I know because I counted while drinking my morning coffee. And once you notice a drip, you cannot stop noticing it until you have either fixed it or lost your mind. I drove to the hardware store on Maple Street, bought a washer for $1.70, and had it fixed by noon. The faucet went silent. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the absence of dripping, and it sounded like applause. Day 2, the cabinet hinges. 4 of them, all squeaking in different keys, like a very small and very untalented choir. New screws and a drop of oil on each one. 20 minutes. Silence again. Day 3. The spice shelf. The house did not have one, which I found personally offensive. I drove back to the hardware store, bought pine boards and brackets, and built one myself above the stove. Not fancy. Functional. I arranged Diane's jars on it, alphabetical, labels facing out, the way she would have wanted. The empty space where the oregano should have been sat in the middle of the shelf like a missing tooth. I did not fill it. Some spaces deserve to stay empty for a while. Each morning, each afternoon, each evening I cooked. Nothing elaborate. Soups mostly. A simple pasta. Rice and beans. And every time I cooked, I opened the kitchen window. Wide. It was habit. 35 years of professional kitchens, where ventilation is not optional, had trained my hands to reach for the window before they reached for the stove. I did not think about it. I just opened it. And the smell of whatever I was making drifted out into the yard, over the slightly leaning fence, and into the evening air of Bayberry Lane. I did not know anyone was paying attention. On the 4th afternoon, I made chicken soup. Not Diane's recipe. Mine. The first recipe I had created entirely on my own since she passed. I stood at the stove and built it from scratch, the way you build anything that matters, one layer at a time. Onion, celery, carrot, garlic, thyme, from the small bunch I had bought at the hardware store of all places, because they had a garden section and I could not resist. Chicken stock I had made that morning from a whole bird in Patience. Salt, pepper, a bay leaf. Nothing revolutionary. But it was mine. Every decision in that pot was mine. The window was open. The steam rose and drifted. And then, from the back of the house, I heard a knock at the kitchen door. If you have made it this far, do me a quick favor. Subscribe. Most people watch without ever doing it. But it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely. I opened the back door. She was standing on the small concrete step, arms crossed, head tilted slightly to the left, studying me with the particular attention of someone who had already formed 3 opinions and was working on a 4th. About 65. Silver hair, cut short and practical. Sharp eyes behind glasses she did not bother to push up her nose. A navy blue cardigan buttoned incorrectly, which she either did not know or did not care about. I suspected the latter. Behind her, sitting on top of the fence between our yards with the posture of a Supreme Court justice, was a large orange cat. "Whatever you are making in there," she said, not introducing herself, not saying hello, not doing any of the things that normal people do when they knock on a stranger's back door. "It smells like an apology I did not know I was owed." I stood there, a wooden spoon in my right hand, an apron on my chest, chicken soup on the stove, and this woman on my doorstep delivering a sentence that had no business being that precise. I laughed. And I need you to understand what that means. I had not laughed, really laughed. The kind that arrives without permission and rearranges your face before you can stop it, in months. Not since before the plate was pushed away. Not since before Keith's driveway and Tommy's truck and the oregano jar on the empty shelf. This woman brought it back in one sentence. "I am sorry," I said, still smiling. "Who are you?" "Vivian Price," she said. "I live there." She pointed to the house on the other side of the fence without looking at it. Fair warning. I have opinions about food. I keep unusual hours. I have been told I am direct to the point of discomfort, which I consider a compliment. And that, she pointed at the orange cat, is Hemingway. He will judge you more honestly than any person you have ever met. I looked at the cat. Hemingway looked back at me with the expression of someone reviewing a resume and finding it adequate but not exceptional. "Harold Sutter," I said. "Retired chef. I keep early hours. I have been told I am quiet to the point of concern. And I just made chicken soup." Ma, I know," she said. "I smelled it from my kitchen." Which is remarkable, because my kitchen has not smelled like real food since 2019. "Would you like to come in?" I said. She actually considered it. Not the way most people pretend to consider things while already knowing their answer, but genuinely, the way you consider a proposition that has real consequences. "No," she said. "I do not enter kitchens I have not been properly invited into. There is a difference between a back door being open and a seat being offered. I respect that difference. I want you to hold on to that. Because I had just spent 10 months in a house where that difference did not exist. Where I was technically welcome, but never actually wanted. Where the door was open but the seat had conditions attached to it that cost $130,000. Vivian Price, in 15 seconds, had understood something about kitchens that my own family had never figured out. "Fair enough," I said. "Then how about this?" I walked to the stove, ladled chicken soup into a bowl, the deep ceramic one I had unpacked that morning, and carried it out the back door, across the 3 feet of yard between my step and the fence, and held it out to her over the wooden planks. She took it with both hands, the way you accept something that has weight beyond its contents. She smelled it first. Eyes closed. A slow inhale through the nose. I recognized the gesture because I had seen it 10,000 times from critics and chefs, and the occasional customer who understood that the first impression of a dish is not visual, it is olfactory. Then she tasted it. 1 spoonful. Slow. Deliberate. And then she was quiet. 5 seconds. I counted. 35 years in kitchens had taught me that the length of silence after a first bite is the most honest review you will ever receive. 1 second means polite. 2 seconds means good. 3 seconds means they are already thinking about the next bite. 5 seconds means you have said something they were not expecting to hear. She opened her eyes and looked at me over the fence. "You are not just a cook," she said. "You are a conversation." That sentence landed somewhere behind my sternum and settled there the way certain things do when they are too true to process quickly. 35 years. Tens of thousands of meals. Diane had loved my cooking. Colleagues had respected it. Keith had eaten it without comment for 10 months. But nobody, in all those years, had ever described my cooking as something that spoke. As if the chicken soup I had made from my own recipe on my fourth afternoon in a kitchen that was finally mine had said something real about the man who made it. "Thank you," I said, which was inadequate but was all I had. She finished the soup standing at the fence. Did not rush. When she was done, she handed the bowl back. "The bowl is mine," she said. "I expect it back clean." "It is actually my bowl," I said. "Not anymore," she said. "I have claimed it." "That is how this works." I laughed again. Twice in one conversation. A new record for the year. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Harold Sutter," she said, as if confirming a reservation. "Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Bayberry Lane. Try not to be boring. We have had enough of that on this street." She walked through a gap in the fence I had not noticed, which meant there was already a path between our yards. Hemingway jumped down and followed her with the dignified reluctance of a bodyguard who finds the assignment beneath him but shows up anyway. But the look he gave me right before jumping, that last glance over his shoulder, was the look of a critic who has decided that the new restaurant is worth a second visit. Not a rave review. Not yet, but a reservation for next time. I went inside, washed the bowl thoroughly, dried it, and set it on the counter beside the stove where the apron hung. Two things by the window now. An apron that meant everything, and a bowl that meant something was beginning. There are people who enter your life like a reservation. Scheduled, expected, accounted for. You know they are coming. You prepare. You set the table in advance. And then there are people who walk in through the kitchen door without knocking and somehow belong there immediately. Vivian Price was the second kind. Now, I need you to understand something about Dorothy Vivian Price before this story goes any further. Because she is not a character in this story. She is a force. 65 years old. Retired journalist. 37 years at the Charleston Post and Courier, covering everything from city council meetings to hurricane evacuations to a 3-part series on shrimp boat captains that she told me once, without a trace of false modesty, was the best writing anyone had done in that paper in a decade. She had never married. Not because no one had asked. Two had. She turned them both down. "I never met anyone worth giving up my morning silence for," she told me one evening over the fence. And the way she said it made it clear this was not a regret. It was a standard. She had lived on Bayberry Lane for 19 years. Alone, but not lonely. There is a difference. And Vivian knew exactly where the line was, because she had drawn it herself. She was writing a memoir, 37 years of local news, each chapter built around a story she had covered, and the person at the center of it. Every news story is really a human story. Wearing an ugly headline, she said. "I am taking the headlines off." She drank bourbon neat. She read on her back porch every evening until the light gave out, and then sometimes after, because she owned a headlamp and had no shame about wearing it. She grew herbs along her side of the fence, badly, with the stubborn optimism of someone who refused to accept that basil does not thrive on willpower alone. "I write about life, Harold," she said when I pointed out that her rosemary looked like it was filing a complaint. "I do not grow it. That is what neighbors are for." And then there was Hemingway. The cat. Orange. Enormous. Opinionated in the way that only cats and retired editors can be. She had named him after the writer because, she said, he is direct. He is opinionated. And he occasionally knocks things off tables for no reason. The resemblance was unavoidable. Hemingway spent his days alternating between Vivian's porch, my fence, and a sunny patch of concrete between our yards that he had clearly decided was sovereign territory. I learned all of this over the course of the second week, not in one conversation, but in the way you learn someone when you are both existing in parallel and the fence between you is only chest high. She did not come over. I did not invite her in. What we did was simpler and, in some ways, more honest than that. I cooked. She talked. It started on a Monday evening. I was making shrimp and grits because I was in Charleston, and it felt like an obligation. And the window was open, and the smell drifted. Vivian appeared at the fence the way she always appeared, without announcement, as if she had simply materialized from the evening air. "That smells irresponsible," she said. I ladled a portion into the bowl that was apparently now hers, the one she had claimed on day one, and brought it to the fence. She took it. She tasted it. And then, without preamble, she told me about the time she covered a shrimp festival in McClellanville in 1991 and accidentally interviewed the wrong person for 45 minutes before realizing he was not the mayor but a man named Leonard, who fixed outboard motors and happened to be wearing a nice shirt. I laughed so hard I had to put down my own bowl. And that became the pattern. I would cook. The window would be open. Vivian would appear. I would hand her a bowl over the fence. She would taste it, and then she would tell me a story. Not small talk. Not polite conversation. A real story. With characters and stakes and a punchline or a lesson, or sometimes both. Tuesday, I made red beans and rice. She told me about covering the flooding of '99 and the woman who refused to evacuate her house because her cat was hiding under the bathtub. "I stayed with her," Vivian said. "The water came up to the porch. The cat came out at midnight. We all survived. I got the best paragraph of my career out of that night." Wednesday, roasted chicken with lemon and thyme from her own garden, which I had rescued from neglect and trimmed properly that morning, while she watched from her porch with the expression of a patient whose doctor was performing surgery she did not fully understand, but trusted. She told me about her father, a postman in Somerville, who had walked the same route for 31 years, and known every dog by name. Thursday, pasta with a simple tomato sauce that I built from scratch because canned sauce is a choice I refuse to make. She told me about the second man who proposed. "He was a good man," she said. "Kind, steady, but he wanted me to be quieter. And I am not a woman who gets quieter. I get louder." So I said no, and he married a librarian, and they are very happy, and I am also very happy. And the world continued to turn. Each evening, the same ritual. Bowl over the fence, story in return. No obligation, no invoice, no condition. She never said thank you for the food. Not once. Instead, she gave me a story. And I realized, sometime around Thursday, that the story was her thank you. That this was how Vivian Price expressed gratitude. Not with words of acknowledgement, but with trust. She was handing me pieces of her life, one evening at a time, and trusting me to hold them carefully, the way I handed her a bowl of food and trusted her to taste it honestly. No one owed anyone anything. And somehow, that made everything worth more. I want you to stay with me here. Because I was not looking for this. I was not looking for anyone or anything beyond a kitchen and quiet and the simple dignity of cooking meals that no one could push away because every plate at my table was mine. But Vivian Price had a way of appearing in your life and rearranging the furniture while you were still deciding whether to let her in. And by the end of that second week, the furniture had already moved. I just had not noticed yet where it was pointing. By week 3, we had a routine, though neither of us had discussed having one. That is the thing about natural rhythms. They do not require a meeting. They do not ask permission. They simply arrive. The way a good stock arrives at the right temperature if you leave it alone long enough. Mornings. I woke at 5:30. Because 35 years of kitchen work does not negotiate with retirement. I made coffee. I cooked breakfast, something real, eggs or oatmeal, or occasionally French toast because a man should treat himself on a Wednesday for no reason at all. And I opened the kitchen window. By 6:15, Vivian's voice would come across the yard, like a weather report delivered with editorial commentary. "Harold, did you eat a real breakfast, or did you do the toast and stubbornness thing again?" "I had eggs, Vivian. I am a professional. Scrambled does not count as cooking." Scrambled absolutely counts as cooking. It is a question of heat control and patience. It is a question of effort, Harold. And I can smell the effort from here. And it is underwhelming. This was how we said good morning. On Saturdays, I went to the farmer's market on Broad Street, 3 blocks from Bayberry Lane. It was the kind of market where the vendors knew each other's names, and the tomatoes still smelled like dirt, and the woman who sold peaches called everyone darling, regardless of age, gender, or willingness to purchase peaches. I had been going since my 2nd week. But on the 3rd Saturday, something changed. I did not plan it. I did not think about it. I simply walked through the stalls with my canvas bag and started buying 2 of things. 2 bunches of collard greens, 2 cartons of eggs, 2 bags of the dark roast coffee from the roaster on the corner, the one Vivian had mentioned once, casually, in the middle of a story about a city councilman who had been caught embezzling funds from a youth baseball league. The only decent coffee in this city comes from Broad Street, she had said, almost as an aside. And I had filed it away the way a chef files away a flavor note. Automatically. Permanently. 2 jars of local honey. 2 loaves of sourdough. 2 of everything. I did not think about what it meant. I just did it. The way you set a 2nd place at a table before you have fully admitted to yourself that you are expecting someone. Vivian never pointed it out. The first time I handed the coffee over the fence, she took it, looked at the label, looked at me, and said, "You are a better listener than most journalists I have worked with. Harold Sutter." And that was all. No thank you, no surprise. Just an observation. Delivered the way she delivered everything. With precision and without sentiment. But she drank it every morning. I know because I could smell it from my kitchen when my window was open. It was around this time that I noticed the chair. There was a 2nd chair at my kitchen table. I had bought the table at an estate sale the 1st week. A small square oak table with room for 2. Maybe 3 if they were friendly. I had placed 1 chair at it. 1 chair, 1 plate, 1 setting. A table for 1. That was the arrangement. But sometime during week 3, a 2nd chair appeared. I do not remember bringing it in. I do not remember placing it there. It was simply there one morning when I came into the kitchen, like a fact that had always been true and was only now bothering to make itself visible. I left it. I did not question it. Some things explain themselves in time. On a Thursday evening, I made pecan pie. Not for any occasion. Because I had bought pecans at the market, and butter was on sale, and sometimes a man bakes a pie, because the act of baking a pie is its own justification. I made it from scratch, crust by hand, filling from memory. The kind of recipe that lives in your fingers more than in your head. I brought a slice to the fence. Vivian took it. She ate it slowly, the way she ate everything I made, with attention and respect, and the occasional pause that meant she was composing her thoughts. When she finished, she set the plate on the fence post and looked at me. "Harold Sutter," she said, "if you are trying to impress me, it is working. And I do not impress easily." I stood there on my side of the fence with the evening light coming through the crepe myrtles and the smell of pecan pie still in the air and a feeling in my chest that I could not name but recognized from a very long time ago. Like a song you have not heard in years but can still hum. I thought about Diane, about something she had said to me once, in our kitchen on Calhoun Street, on a Sunday afternoon when I had made her favorite lemon cake for no reason other than I wanted to see her face when she tasted it. She had taken one bite, closed her eyes and said, "You cook. Like you are writing love letters, Harold. Most people just never learn to read them." Vivian, I realized, standing at the fence with pecan pie on a plate and bourbon in her hand, and Hemingway weaving between her ankles like a furry, judgmental figure 8, could read them. She had been reading them since the chicken soup on day 4. Every meal I handed over the fence was a letter. And she had been reading every single one. I did not say this out loud. Some things do not need to be said. They need to be cooked and handed over a fence, and received with 5 seconds of silence that means more than any word. That evening, after Vivian had gone inside, I washed the dishes and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the dark yard and the fence and the faint glow of her reading lamp through the trees. I was happy, not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself or demands witnesses. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones like warmth from a stove that has been on all day. I had not felt it in 3 years. And I was not fool enough to take it for granted. But peace, I was learning, has a way of reminding you it exists right before something threatens to take it away, and that something arrived on a Wednesday evening. In the form of a phone call I almost did not answer. Stay with me. I was building a second spice shelf when the phone rang. The first one, the one I had built during week 1, was full. Diane's jars took up most of it, but I had been adding my own. A smoked chipotle from the market. A jar of sumac that Vivian had brought back from a trip to the Middle Eastern grocery on King Street because she had read an article about it and decided I needed to expand my vocabulary. Her word, not mine. A small container of saffron I had been saving for something that deserved it. The shelf was crowded. A second one was necessary. So I was measuring pine boards on the kitchen counter at 6:45 on a Wednesday evening when my phone lit up on the table. Keith. I looked at the screen. His name. Just his name. Glowing in the quiet kitchen. We had not spoken since moving day. Since the driveway. Since neither did she. 3.5 weeks of silence between a father and his only son. That is not a long time in some families. In mine, it was an ocean. I almost let it ring out. My hands were on the pine board. The pencil was behind my ear. The measuring tape was stretched to 14 inches. I could have let it go to voicemail and dealt with it later, or not at all, and no one would have blamed me for it. But here is the thing about being a father. It does not have a off switch. It does not come with terms and conditions. It does not care that your daughter-in-law pushed away your plate, or that your son stood in a driveway with his hands in his pockets and watched you leave. It sits in your chest like a pilot light, low and steady, and the moment your child's name appears on a screen it flares. I picked up. Keith. His voice was different. I knew it immediately. When you have listened to someone's voice for 38 years, from the first cry in the delivery room, to the awkward teenage mumble, to the steady adult register, you hear the variations the way a musician hears a note slightly off key. Keith's voice was tight. Wound. Like a string that had been tuned too many times, and was one turn away from snapping. Hey Dad, you got a minute? I am building a shelf, I said. So talk while I work. A pause. How are you settling in? Fine, I said. And this time, fine was actually true. Good. That is good. Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that has something heavy sitting inside it, waiting for the door to open. How is the neighborhood? Quiet, I said. I have a neighbor who has opinions about food and a cat that judges me. It is an improvement. He did not laugh. Keith usually laughs at my dry observations. He did not laugh, which told me everything I needed to know about the weight of whatever was coming next. Things have been... He started. Stopped. Started again. It has been a rough few weeks, Dad. I put down the measuring tape. Not because I was done measuring, but because I know my son's voice. And his voice was telling me that whatever came next required both hands free and my full attention. What happened? I said. A breath. The kind of breath that comes before a confession that has been held too long. Work has not been great, he said. It has been. There have been some changes. I am handling it. It is just a lot right now. He did not say more than that. He did not give me details. He did not tell me what kind of changes, or how bad it was, or what handling it actually looked like. Beaumont men. Sutter men. Whatever you want to call us. We carry things alone. We inherit that from our fathers, who inherited it from theirs. And it is a tradition that has never once served any of us well, And yet we keep doing it because putting the weight down feels more terrifying than carrying it until our backs give out. I recognized what he was doing because I had done it myself. For years. For decades. Diane used to say, "Harold, you would carry a stove up a mountain before you would ask someone to help you find the stairs." She was right. And Keith was carrying something up a mountain. I could hear it. In every careful, controlled word. "I am sorry to hear that, son," I said. And I meant it. Whatever had happened between us, and plenty had, that was my boy. His weight was still my weight. That does not switch off. "We are okay for now," he said quickly. Too quickly. The way you say something when you need it to be true more than it actually is. "I have some savings. I am looking at options. It is just." "Just what?" I said. Silence. A long one. "The kind that costs something to break. Vanessa wants to reach out to you," he finally said. "She wanted me to ask if maybe we could all have dinner. The three of us. Together." I picked up my pencil, rolled it between my fingers, looked at the pine board on the counter, and the spice shelf on the wall, and the apron hanging by the window, and the bowl on the counter that still technically belonged to Vivian, and the second chair at the table that I had never officially placed there. "I will think about it," I said. "Dad," I said, "I will think about it, Keith. That is what I have right now." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Dad. Take care of yourself," I said. And I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The pine board was still on the counter. The pencil was still in my hand. The measuring tape was still stretched to 14 inches. But I was not thinking about shelves anymore. I was thinking about Keith's voice and the way it had sounded like a man trying to describe a fire while standing inside it. The evening light was going amber through the kitchen window. The crepe myrtles outside were catching the last of it. From the backyard, quiet, steady, completely unhurried, Vivian's voice came over the fence. "You okay in there?" I thought about it. Honestly. Which is something she had already made me better at doing in 3 short weeks. Not answering automatically. Not saying fine. Actually checking. "I do not know yet," I said. A pause. "The comfortable kind. The kind that does not demand to be filled." "Then come eat," she said. I made nothing. But I set the table. And despite everything, Keith, Vanessa, the dinner invitation, the rough few weeks, the whole impossible, complicated weight of being a father to a grown man who will not tell you what is breaking, I laughed. "Yeah," I said. "That sounds about right." That evening, for the first time, I went to Vivian's house. Not through the front door. Through the gap in the fence that Hemingway had apparently been using as a personal thoroughfare for years, the one that connected our backyards like a doorway between two lives that had not yet decided how closely they wanted to overlap. She was on her back porch, bourbon in hand, reading lamp on, Hemingway on the railing, positioned with the architectural precision of a cat who has determined exactly which 6 inches receive the best evening breeze. "I did not invite you," Vivian said, without looking up from her book. "You told me to come eat," I said. "I told you to come eat. I did not say come to my house. There is a fence between us for a reason, Harold, and yet there is a gap in it." She looked up, almost smiled. "Sit down," she said. I sat. From that chair, I could see through the screen door into her house, and what I saw explained her more completely than any conversation we had ever had. Books, everywhere, on shelves, on tables, in stacks on the floor that had achieved structural integrity through sheer stubbornness. A typewriter on a desk beside a laptop that looked like it had been placed there under protest. Stacks of yellow legal pads. The memoir. No television. The house smelled like old paper and bourbon and the faint herbal scent of unsuccessful gardening. Vivian reached behind her chair, produced a second glass and a bottle of Maker's Mark, and poured without asking if I drank bourbon. She handed it to me. We sat. She did not ask about the phone call. She did not ask about Keith. She simply sat there, bourbon in hand, book closed on her lap, and waited. I have learned, over 68 years, that the people who ask the fewest questions are often the ones most worth answering. Because they are not asking out of curiosity. They are making space. And Vivian made space the way she did everything else. Deliberately. Without fanfare. And with complete confidence that whatever needed to fill it would arrive when it was ready. It arrived about halfway through the bourbon. My son called, I said. I heard the phone, she said. Not I know. Not what did he say. Just a fact. No pressure behind it. He is in trouble, I said. He did not say how much. But I know his voice. And his voice is not good. What kind of trouble? She said. Work. Maybe money. He would not say. He just said rough few weeks, and then his wife asked him to invite me to dinner. His wife, Vivian said. The one with the plate. I looked at her. I had not told her the details of what had happened at Keith's house. Only the outline. Son. Daughter-in-law. Disagreement. Left. But Vivian was a journalist who had spent 37 years listening to what people did not say, and apparently the outline had been enough. The one with the plate, I confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. A moth circled the reading lamp with the persistence of someone who refuses to learn from experience. You know what I learned in 37 years of journalism? She said. People do not invite you to dinner to apologize. They invite you to dinner because they need something they cannot get by themselves. That sentence sat in the air between us like a dish that needs a moment before you touch it. You think she wants money, I said. I think she wants something, Vivian said. Whether it is money or forgiveness or help or just someone to sit across from while the world falls apart, I do not know. But people do not reach back to the person they pushed away unless the ground has shifted under their feet. I sat with that. The bourbon was warm in my chest. The evening was settling into that particular Charleston quiet where the insects take over, and the trees stop moving, and everything holds still like a breath between chapters. You will go, Vivian said. Not a question. Probably, I said, because you are that kind of man. Just do not go empty-handed, and do not go unguarded. I looked at her. In the yellow light of the reading lamp, surrounded by books and bourbon and Hemingway, snoring on a stack of newspapers from 2014, I recognized something I had not felt since Diane. Trust. Not the kind you build over years, though that kind is valuable. The kind that arrives because someone sees you clearly and does not look away. Vivian saw me. She had seen me since the chicken soup on day 4, and she had not once tried to turn what she saw into something more convenient for herself. She was the first person since Diane I had trusted enough to speak honestly to. And that, at 68, is not a small thing. That is a door opening that you were not sure still had hinges. Thank you, Vivian, I said. For what? For the bourbon. And for not asking questions you already knew the answers to. She raised her glass. That is the most useful skill journalism ever taught me. The bourbon is just good manners. I finished my glass. Stood. Looked through the screen door at the typewriter and the legal pads. The memoir, I said. How is it coming? Slowly, she said. Like everything worth writing. If you ever need a chapter about a retired chef who found something he was not looking for on Bayberry Lane, I said, I might have some material. She looked at me. The real look. The one she reserved for things that surprised her. I will keep that in mind, she said. I walked back through the gap in the fence. Stood in my kitchen in the dark. The pine board was still on the counter. The apron was still by the window. And somewhere on the other side of the fence, a woman was sitting with bourbon and a reading lamp and 37 years of understanding how people work. And she had just told me, without quite saying it, that whatever was coming, I did not have to face it alone. What I did not know yet, what none of us knew, was that Vanessa's request for dinner had nothing to do with missing me. It had everything to do with what was coming. And what was coming would sit down at my kitchen table and force every single one of us to decide whether we could stomach the truth. If you have been listening and want stories like this to keep coming, it helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it is what keeps this running. Thank you. For real. There are moments in life that arrive quietly. No drums, no warning. They simply appear on your front porch on a Saturday morning while you are carrying 2 bags of groceries and detonate everything around you. But before I get to the detonation, I need to tell you about the morning. It was a Saturday. Farmer's market Saturday. I had just come back with my 2 bags. Yes, still 2 of everything. I am not going to explain it anymore. You know why. I was carrying them up the front steps. Keys in my teeth, because I have never figured out how to carry groceries and operate a door at the same time, and I am 68 years old, and I have accepted this as a permanent limitation. I looked up. Vanessa was standing on my porch, alone. No Keith. No warning. No phone call. Just Vanessa. In a gray coat I had never seen before, holding her purse strap with both hands the way people do when they need something to hold on to that is not a person. I stared at her. She stared at me. 2 people standing 3 feet apart on a porch in Charleston with a year's worth of unsaid things between them and 2 bags of groceries and a set of keys in someone's teeth. I took the keys out of my mouth. Vanessa, I said. Harold, she said. A pause long enough to park a truck in. Keith does not know I am here, she said. I set the grocery bags down slowly. Leaned against the doorframe. Folded my arms. Not aggressively. Just carefully. The way you hold yourself when you are not sure what is about to happen but you want to be ready for it. Then maybe, I said, you should tell me why you are. She looked past me into the house for a moment. Then back at my face. And something in her expression was different from the woman who had sat across from me at that kitchen table with her folded hands and her pushed-away plate and her $130,000 demand. That woman had been armored, polished, in control, the kind of control that comes from rehearsal. This woman looked like the armor had been cracking for weeks, and she was exhausted from holding the pieces together. "Can I come in?" she said. "I will get coffee," I said. We sat in the 2 porch chairs I had bought at an estate sale the second week. 2 chairs. I had bought 2 before I understood why. Now, sitting in one while my daughter-in-law sat in the other, holding a mug of coffee with both hands the way she had held her purse strap, I understood. Some things prepare you for moments you cannot see coming. The crepe myrtles were still. The street was quiet. The particular golden quiet of a late Saturday morning in early spring. Vanessa looked out at the trees for a long time before she spoke. "I need you to know," she said slowly, "that I am not here to ask you for money." "All right," I said. "I mean it, Harold. I know that is what you are expecting. And I know I earned that expectation. But that is not why I am here." I said nothing. I have found, over 68 years, that silence is frequently the most intelligent response available. It gives people room to arrive at whatever they came to say without you pushing them there. She took a breath. The kind of breath that costs something. "Marcus does not know how bad it is," she said. Then she caught herself. Keith. Keith does not know how bad it is. I mean, he knows some of it. He knows things have been tight, but he does not know. She stopped. Set her mug down on the arm of the chair. Pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. 6 months ago, she said. And her voice was doing that careful, controlled thing people do when they are one wrong word away from falling apart completely. Keith was demoted. I went very still. He had been department manager for 4 years. They called him in on a Monday morning and told him they were restructuring. He went from manager to floor associate in one meeting. His salary dropped 40%. The crepe myrtles moved slightly. A car passed slowly on Bayberry Lane. The world continued its ordinary business, while something extraordinary was being said on my porch. And he came home that evening, Vanessa said, and told me nothing. He told me absolutely nothing. She picked up the mug again. Put it down. Picked it up. Her hands needed something to do. I found out through the bank statements, she said. 2 months later. The direct deposits changed. 40% less every 2 weeks. For 2 months. And he never said a word. When I asked him, he said it was a temporary adjustment, a restructuring thing. He said it would go back to normal. Did it? I said. She looked at me. And in that look was every answer I needed. I confronted him, she said. Showed him the statements. He got quiet. Then he got defensive. Then he said I was overreacting. And then he stopped talking about it entirely. She was quiet for a moment. The morning light had shifted. The shadows on the porch had moved an inch to the left. So I handled it, she said. Because someone had to. I picked up extra shifts at the pharmacy. Night shifts, mostly, 3 times a week. I sold things. The dining set my mother gave us. My jewelry. Some of Keith's old equipment from the garage that he had not touched in years. I cut every expense I could find. I stopped buying anything that was not essential. She paused. Looked at her coffee as if she had forgotten it was there. And when none of that was enough, she said. I looked at the 68-year-old man living in our spare room who had $221,000 in a savings account, and She stopped. You grabbed, I said quietly. She flinched. Then she nodded. Slowly. The way you nod when someone has named the thing you could not name yourself. I was not trying to rob you, Harold, she said. And her voice cracked for the first time. I was trying to keep the roof over my family's head, while my husband would not even look at what was happening. I did not know what else to do. I did not have anyone else to turn to. And I handled it wrong. I handled it so wrong. The porch was quiet. The crepe myrtles were still, and I sat there looking at this woman. This woman who had pushed away my plate and told me to hand over my savings or leave. And I felt something I was not expecting to feel. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Not the dark, quiet pleasure of watching someone who wronged you finally break down and admit it. I had expected to feel those things, if this moment ever came. I had imagined it, in the early days on Bayberry Lane. Sitting on this very porch with my coffee, replaying that Tuesday evening. The folded hands, the pushed plate, the number she knew precisely because my own son had told her. I had imagined her coming to me. And in every version, I had felt righteous, but righteousness was not what arrived. What arrived was something closer to grief. The specific grief of watching someone drown in a problem they built with their own hands while trying to save the people they love. Because I knew that feeling. I knew it in my bones. I want you to stay with me here. Because this is the part of the story that matters most. I thought about Diane. Not the laughing Diane from the Savannah photograph. Not the Diane who teased me about oregano. I thought about the Diane from 2 months before she told me about her heart. The quiet Diane. The one who had started rearranging the spice cabinet at odd hours. I had come home one evening and found her in the kitchen at 11 at night, pulling jars off the shelf and putting them back in a different order. Alphabetical. Then by color. Then by frequency of use. I stood in the doorway watching her. And I knew. I did not know what was wrong. But I knew something was wrong, because Diane did not reorganize things unless her hands needed something to do, while her mind dealt with something it could not say out loud. 2 months later, she told me about the heart failure. 2 months of knowing and not telling me. 2 months of organizing spice jars at midnight instead of saying, Harold, I am scared. Fear makes people organize. Fear makes people hide. And hiding makes people grab at whatever is closest. Because when the ground is moving under your feet, you reach for the nearest thing that looks solid. Even if it belongs to someone else. Even if reaching for it is the wrong thing to do. Vanessa had been scared for 6 months. watching the bank statements shrink, working night shifts at a pharmacy, while her husband pretended nothing was happening, selling her mother's dining set, lying awake at 3 in the morning doing math that never added up. And instead of saying, "I am scared," she had looked at the 68-year-old man in the spare room, the one with the savings account and the quiet routines and the fixed faucets, and she had grabbed. That did not make what she did right, but it made it human. And at 68, I have learned that the distance between wrong and human is often shorter than we want it to be. "Why are you telling me this?" I said carefully, and not Keith. She was quiet for a long moment. The coffee in her mug had gone cold. She had not taken a single sip since the conversation began. "Because I do not know how to," she said finally. "Every time I try, he shuts down. He changes the subject. He tells me everything is fine." She said that last word the way I used to say it, like a wall, like a locked door. "And because," she stopped, started again, "because I think you are the only person who will tell me the truth about what I should do. Keith loves me too much to be honest right now, and I do not have anyone else." That last sentence landed differently than she probably intended it to, because I heard what was underneath it. Not manipulation, not strategy, not the boardroom woman with the folded hands, just a person who had been carrying something enormous alone for too long, sitting on a porch she had no real right to be on, asking a man she had wronged to help her find her footing. I picked up my coffee, drank slowly, set it down. "You have to tell him," I said. She flinched. "All of it," I said. "The bank statements, the night shifts, the things you sold, the pharmacy, all of it. Tonight. Before that dinner. Harold. Vanessa." I turned and looked at her directly. "You asked me for the truth. That is the truth. The only thing worse than the hole you are in is letting your husband keep standing next to it without knowing it is there. You are both hiding. You are hiding what you did to keep things together. And he is hiding what fell apart in the first place. And a marriage cannot survive two people hiding in the same house." She stared at me. Her eyes were bright in the particular way that means someone is refusing to cry through willpower alone. "And he has to tell you the truth too," I said. "The real truth. About the demotion. About what happened. About what he has been carrying. Both of you. Everything on the table. Before that dinner. And if he will not," she said, "then you will know something important about the man you married." I said. "And that is worth knowing. Even when it hurts." She was quiet. The morning had shifted around us. The golden light had moved. The shadows had changed shape. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. And the sound was so ordinary, it felt almost offensive given what had just been said on this porch. "What if it breaks us?" she said quietly. I looked at her. "Vanessa, you are already breaking. The only question is whether you break apart or break open. And in my experience, breaking open is the one that has a chance of putting you back together." She looked at her cold coffee, then at me, then at the crepe myrtles, then back at me. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," I said. "And then you come to that dinner having already told him. That is the condition." "What condition?" she said. "The condition for me being at that dinner at all," I said. "I do not sit down at tables with lies, Vanessa. I am a chef. I know what spoiled ingredients do to a meal." She stood up. The chair creaked as her weight left it. The same sound it had made when she sat down. But different now, lighter somehow, the way things sound when something heavy has been set down, even if the setting down is not yet complete. She stood there for a moment on my porch, holding her purse strap again, looking at me with the expression of someone who has just handed over something they have been carrying for a very long time and is not quite sure what to do with their empty hands. "Harold," she said. "Yes, I am sorry." She said it simply. Not the formal, rehearsed version. Not the dinner table version that would come later, if it came at all. This was the raw one. The one that arrives before a person has had time to organize it into proper sentences. For what I said. For the plate. For the way I talked to you in that kitchen. For all of it. I looked at her. This woman standing on my porch in her gray coat, with her cracked armor and her cold coffee and 6 months of night shifts and bank statements and sold furniture behind her. And I saw something I had not seen that Tuesday evening at the dinner table. I saw a woman who had been drowning and had reached for the wrong thing, and was only now, standing on solid ground for the first time in half a year, able to look back and see what she had done. I know, I said. And we will get to that properly. But first, go home and have the hardest conversation of your marriage. It will be worth it. The best meals I have ever made were the ones that required the most preparation. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Which, from Vanessa, was significant. She walked down the porch steps, stopped at the bottom, turned around one more time. You have a nice house, Harold, she said. The kitchen smells good, even from out here. Thank you, I said. She walked to her car, got in, sat there for about 30 seconds without starting the engine, which told me she was either composing herself or making a phone call or simply sitting with the weight of what she had agreed to do. Then the engine started, and she pulled away from Bayberry Lane. I watched her car disappear around the corner of Maple Street. Then I sat back in my chair. The chair she had been sitting in was still warm. The morning had turned fully into late morning. The kind of late Saturday morning in early spring that Charleston does better than almost anywhere. Golden light through the crepe myrtles. The street quiet except for a lawnmower 2 houses down. The smell of jasmine from the backyard coming around the side of the house in slow, warm waves. I sat with it. The conversation. The confession. The condition. The look on her face when I said break apart or break open. The way her hands had held that coffee mug like it was the only steady thing in the room. I do not know how long I sat there. Long enough for the shadows to move again. Long enough for the lawnmower to stop and start and stop again. Then, from the backyard, quiet, steady, completely unhurried, in the way that only Vivian Price can be unhurried. Her voice came around the side of the house. Saw a woman on your porch. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I knew she was standing at the fence, probably with a trowel in one hand, because she had been waging her ongoing war against the Basil's refusal to cooperate, and she never surrendered her weapons, even when she was losing. My daughter-in-law, I said. I heard her turn a patch of soil. The soft, rhythmic sound of a trowel in dirt. How did that go? I thought about it honestly. Which is something she had already made me better at doing in 4 short weeks. Not answering on reflex. Not saying fine. Actually sitting inside the question and feeling around for what was true. Better than expected, I said. Worse than hoped. She was quiet for a moment. The trowel kept working. That is most of life, Harold. Yeah, I said. I am starting to think you are right about that. The trowel stopped. I heard her stand up. She came around the side of the house and stood at the edge of my porch, garden gloves on, dirt on her knees, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at me the way she did when she was deciding whether to say the next thing. The Vivian pause. The one that meant something real was coming. You are a good man, Harold Sutter, she said. She said it simply. The way someone states a fact about weather or geography, not a compliment, not flattery, an observation, delivered with the same precision she applied to everything. Her bourbon, her journalism, her opinions about food, her stubborn Basil. Then she went back to her garden. I sat with that for a long time. 5 words and a last name, spoken over a half-dead herb garden by a woman who had never once in 4 weeks said anything she did not mean. A woman who measured her words, the way I measured seasoning, carefully, specifically, with the understanding that too much ruins the dish and too little leaves it empty. You are a good man, Harold Sutter. I turned those words over in my hands the way I turned Diane's photograph over every night before bed, examining them, feeling the weight. Vanessa had offered me $130,000 worth of reasons to doubt my own value. She had pushed away my plate and told me my presence was a liability, and my savings were a resource to be extracted. She had reduced 35 years of early mornings and busted knuckles and meals made with love to a number on a spreadsheet. And then Vivian Price, standing in dirt and garden gloves on a Saturday morning in Charleston, had given me 5 words that put every single one of those reasons to rest. Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth more than $100,000. 5 words from the right person, spoken at the right time, in the right light, over the right fence, are worth more than anything anyone had said to me in 3 years. I went inside eventually, made lunch, opened the window, let the smell drift out into the yard, over the fence, past the struggling herbs and the sovereign patch of concrete where Hemingway was sleeping in the sun, the ordinary rhythm of a Saturday on Bayberry Lane, continuing as if the world had not just rearranged itself on my front porch, but it had. And what came next would rearrange it again. The dinner was Sunday evening. And I need to tell you about the cooking, because the cooking is the part that mattered. I woke at 4 that morning. Not from anxiety, from purpose. The kind of waking that happens when your body knows before your mind does that today requires everything you have. I went to the kitchen. The early light was just beginning to reach the window. Thin and blue. The light that comes before the sun has fully committed to the day. I stood there for a moment, looking at the apron on its hook beside the window. White cotton, coffee stain on the left side. The last thing I had taken from Keith's house. I had not worn it since the night I folded it on that counter. 4.5 weeks. The longest I had gone without wearing an apron since I was 23 years old and walked into my first professional kitchen, and the head chef threw one at me and said, "Put that on. And do not take it off until I tell you to." I reached for it, put it on, tied it behind my back the way I have, tied it 10,000 times. 2 loops, pull tight, tuck the ends, and something settled in my chest, something that had been waiting. I was not cooking tonight because I had to, not because it was expected, not because it justified my presence in someone else's house. I was cooking because my son and his wife were coming to my table, in my kitchen, and I wanted to feed them. That is the difference. That is the whole difference. Want versus obligation. Love versus transaction. A meal that comes from choosing versus a meal that comes from proving. I made Diane's beef stew. I started with the onions, 3 of them diced fine, the way she taught me on that rainy Sunday in 1993, when we stood side by side in the kitchen on Calhoun Street and she said, "Smaller, Harold. The onions should disappear into the stew. They should be felt, not seen." I have been cutting onions that way ever since. My eyes watered. They always do. And every time, I think of her. The beef. I seared it in batches, small batches, because crowding the pan drops the temperature, and then you are boiling instead of browning. And the difference between a good stew and a great one lives in that sear. The smell filled the kitchen, the smell of hot iron and butter and caramelizing meat. The most familiar smell in the world to me. The smell of Diane's kitchen and mine and every kitchen I had ever stood in where something real was being made. The stock. Homemade. I had prepared it the day before, the way I always did, from bones and vegetables and thyme. You cannot rush stock. You cannot shortcut it. It is patience in liquid form. The oregano. I reached for the shelf, and my hand found the gap where the jar should have been. The jar I had left on the empty shelf in Keith's kitchen. For a moment, I stood there, with my hand in the air, reaching for something that was not there. Then I opened the small container of dried oregano I had bought at the market 2 weeks ago. New oregano. Not Diane's jar. Not her handwriting on the label. But the same herb. The same smell. I measured it into my palm, And for the first time, I did not hold back. "A little more, Harold," I said out loud. To no one. To her. To the kitchen. And I put in a little more. The stew simmered all afternoon. The kitchen filled with it. The whole house filled with it. I opened the window and let it drift out into the yard, across the fence, into the spring evening. I did not know if Vivian could smell it. I suspected she could. I suspected Hemingway could, and was forming opinions. At 6:30, I set the table. 3 places. Real plates, the ones I had bought at the estate sale. Cloth napkins. Water glasses. A loaf of sourdough from the bakery on King Street, because Keith had mentioned once, a lifetime ago, that he liked sourdough, and I had not forgotten. A father does not forget. The second chair at the table, the one that had appeared on its own during week 3, I moved to the side. Tonight was not about Vivian. Tonight was about my son and his wife, and a pot of stew, and the truth. At 7, there was a knock at the front door. I wiped my hands on the apron, walked through the living room, opened the door. Keith was standing on my porch, and the first thing I noticed was his eyes, red-rimmed, tired in the way that comes, not from lack of sleep, but from a conversation that strips everything down to the frame, the kind of tired that arrives after you have finally said the thing you have been carrying for 6 months, and the weight is gone but the muscles that held it are still shaking. He had been told. And he had told. He pulled me into a hug before I could say a word. A real one. The kind that lasts 4 or 5 seconds longer than regular hugs. The kind that holds on because letting go means having to find words, and the words are not ready yet. I felt his shoulders shake once. Just once. "Dad," he said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. Vanessa was behind him, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked different from yesterday. Not the cracked armor, not the gray coat. Something simpler. Something that looked like a woman who had spent the last 24 hours dismantling a wall she had built over 6 months and was standing in the open air for the first time, blinking at the light. She was holding a bowl. A salad. Small. Simple. She had made something. She had brought it to my kitchen. I understood the gesture immediately, the way one cook understands another. She was not just bringing food. She was asking permission to contribute to the meal. Not with money. Not with demands. With lettuce and tomatoes and the humility of someone who knows they are not the chef tonight. "Come in," I said. They came in. Keith stopped in the kitchen doorway. I watched him look at the stove, the pot, the steam, the apron on my chest, the table set for 3. He breathed in. "That smells like Mom's," he said quietly. "It is," I said. He nodded, pressed his lips together, did not trust himself to say anything else. We sat down, the 3 of us, around my table, in my kitchen, on Bayberry Lane, the beef stew in the center, still simmering in the pot, because I had brought it to the table in the pot itself, the way Diane always served it, because she said, a stew that has been transferred to a serving dish has lost something essential in the translation. The first few minutes were quiet. The particular silence of people who have already said the big things and are now figuring out what the ordinary ones sound like again. Spoons against bowls. Bread being torn. The sound of 3 people eating a meal that had taken 30 years to learn and all afternoon to make. Then Vanessa set down her spoon, looked at me across the table I had bought, the table in the kitchen I had chosen, the table where no one had ever pushed away a plate. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one. What I said to you in that kitchen," Vanessa continued, and her voice was steady, but it was costing her something. I could hear it, the way you hear the strain in a bridge cable that is holding but holding hard over the meal you had just cooked for us. That was wrong. You had done nothing but give. Every morning, every dinner, every broken thing you fixed without being asked. And I sat across from you and talked to you like you were a line item on a spreadsheet. Not a father, not a person, a number. The table was quiet. Keith was looking at his bowl. The stew was still steaming between us, filling the kitchen with Diane's recipe, with 30 years of oregano and patience and love that had outlived the woman who created it. "And I am sorry," Vanessa said. "Genuinely. Not because you caught me. Not because things fell apart. Because it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I said it, and I said it anyway because I was scared and I did not know what else to do." I looked at her across my table. This table. Not the one in Keith's kitchen where the plate had been pushed away. This one. The one I had bought at an estate sale on Bayberry Lane. The one where no conditions had ever been attached to a single meal. I took a breath. "I appreciate that," I said. "I do. And I forgive you." "Vanessa," she exhaled. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "Because holding on to it does not help any of us," I said. "And if Diane taught me anything in 28 years, it is that grudges spoil faster than leftovers. They take up space in your kitchen that belongs to something better." Keith looked up. Almost smiled. The Diane reference landed the way it was meant to. Gently, like a hand on the shoulder. "But," I said. Both of them looked at me. The word "but" at a dinner table has a gravity all its own. "I will not be moving back in," I said. "That chapter is closed. Not out of anger. Not out of punishment. I found something on Bayberry Lane. I did not know I was missing, and I am not ready to give it up." Keith looked at me. Curious. The curiosity of a son who is seeing his father clearly for the first time in a long while, maybe for the first time ever, not as dad, not as the man who fixes things, but as a man. A whole, separate, complete person with his own life, and his own peace, and his own kitchen window that opens onto something good. "Found something like what?" he said, and I thought about Vivian Price. About her yellow reading lamp, and her bourbon, and her strong opinions about food. About Hemingway on the fence. About chicken soup handed over wooden planks and a ceramic bowl that was apparently no longer mine. About 5 words on a Saturday morning that were worth more than $130,000. About a gap in the fence that had been there before I arrived, as if the yard had been waiting. "Like cooking for the right reasons again," I said. Which was the truth. And also not the whole truth. But Keith, to his credit, seemed to understand that, because he looked at me for a moment with Diane's eyes in his father's face, and then he smiled. Small, tired, genuine, the kind of smile that says, "I do not need the whole answer. I just need to know you are okay." "Good, Dad," he said quietly. "I am glad." We cleared the dishes. And then we talked. For nearly 2 hours. The three of us sat at that together. Keith told me about the demotion. The full version. Not the controlled, careful version he had given Vanessa the night before. The real one. The humiliation of it. The meeting that lasted 9 minutes. The walk back to his desk to pack his manager's nameplate into a cardboard box while his former team watched. The drive home where he pulled over on the interstate and sat in his car for 45 minutes because he could not figure out how to walk through his own front door and say the words. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not fix it. Because some things cannot be fixed with a wrench or a recipe. Some things can only be heard. Vanessa told me about the night shifts, the pharmacy, the 3 in the morning math, selling the dining set her mother had given her, which, she said, was the moment she realized she had crossed a line she could not see. My mother saved for 2 years to buy that set, she said. And I sold it online for $400. I did not write a check. I want you to understand that. I did not rescue anyone that evening. I did not open my savings account and slide money across the table. That was not what they needed. And it was not what I had to give. What I had to give was 35 years of managing a kitchen on a budget that never had enough and always had to stretch. I helped Keith make a list. The right calls to make. The right people to contact. A financial counselor Tommy had used after his divorce, who was good and not expensive. The unemployment office. A resume service. The specific, practical, step-by-step sequence of actions for two people standing at the edge of a very serious hole who needed someone to help them see it clearly instead of panicking into it. That I could do. That cost me nothing but time and experience and the particular clarity that comes from having survived the worst thing and come out the other side with a good recipe and better judgment. When they stood to leave, it was nearly 10. The stew pot was empty. The sourdough was gone. The coffee cups were cold. Keith shook my hand and then pulled me in again. Shorter this time, but no less real. "Thank you, Dad," he said. "For dinner. For all of it. You are my son," I said. "That does not come with conditions." At the door, Vanessa stopped. She looked at me. Then she did something I was not expecting. She hugged me. Stiff at first. She is not a natural hugger. Her arms were uncertain. The way arms are when they are not sure they have earned the right to hold on. But then something in her shoulders dropped, the same way they had dropped when I said I forgive you. And it became real. A real hug. The kind that says more than the words that came before it. "Thank you, Harold," she said. "Take care of my son," I said. "I will," she said, and I believed her. I drove home to Bayberry Lane with the windows down and the spring air coming through cold and clean, the way Charleston air gets on Sunday evenings in March when the temperature drops just enough to remind you that winter has not quite finished saying goodbye. The streets were quiet. Streetlights on. The occasional porch light glowing through the trees like small, steady promises. I drove slowly, not because I needed to, but because there was no rush. For the first time in a very long time, I was not driving towards something or away from something. I was just going home. Bayberry Lane was dark and still. The crepe myrtles stood bare against the sky. The jasmine bush in my backyard was invisible in the dark, but present in the air, the way some things are, felt before they are seen. Vivian's porch light was on. She was sitting at the back steps of her house. Not the front, the back. The side that faces my yard. Bourbon in hand. Hemingway beside her, curled into a shape that suggested he had been waiting patiently and wanted credit for it. 9:30 on a Sunday evening. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I got out of the car, stood at the bottom of my porch steps for a moment. The night air carried the last trace of beef stew from my kitchen window, which I had left open. Because I always left it open. Because that is who I am now. A man who leaves his kitchen window open and lets the smell of whatever he is making drift into the world. "How was dinner?" Vivian called across the yard. "Complicated," I said. "And then good," she nodded. The slow Vivian nod. The one that means she has processed something and filed it exactly where it belongs. "That is family," she said. "Yeah," I said. "That is family." I looked at her for a moment. The porch light, the bourbon, the cat, the quiet street, and the oak-shaped shadows and the gap in the fence that connected her yard to mine like a sentence that someone had started a long time ago and left for us to finish. "Vivian, you want to have breakfast tomorrow morning?" "Not over the fence. Actually, sit down. Yours or mine. Does not matter." A pause. She tilted her head slightly, considered it with the same serious attention she gave her tomato-less herb garden and her bourbon and her strong opinions about everything. This was not a casual question, and she knew it. Breakfast at a table is not soup over a fence. It is a seat being offered. And Vivian Price, who had told me on day one that she respected the difference between a door being open and a seat being offered, understood exactly what I was asking. "Mine," she said finally. "Your kitchen is better. But my coffee is the only thing keeping this street civilized." "It really is," I said. "And I meant it." She smiled. The real one. Not the almost smile or the professional smile or the dry journalist smile. The real one. The one that I imagined had taken years to build, assembled carefully from grief and solitude and bourbon and 37 years of watching people tell their stories, the kind of smile that does not arrive easily and does not leave quickly and changes the whole geography of a face when it shows up. 7:30, she said. Do not be late. I have never been late to a meal in my life. I said. There is a first time for everything, Harold. Do not let it be tomorrow. I laughed. She laughed. Hemingway opened one eye, determined that nothing important was happening, and closed it again. I went inside. The kitchen was clean. I had washed everything before I left. The pot, the bowls, the spoons, the sourdough crumbs wiped from the counter. The apron was back on its hook by the window. The spice shelf was in order. The ceramic bowl that belonged to Vivian was on the counter, clean, waiting to be filled again. I walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, the way I did every night, reached for Diane's photograph on the nightstand. The one from Savannah. The one where she is laughing at something I cannot remember, but her laugh I remember perfectly, the sound of it, the way it filled a room, the way the smell of a good meal fills a kitchen, completely, generously, without holding anything back. I held it with both hands. The recipe still works, sweetheart, I said. Just needed a different kitchen. I looked at her smile. That permanent, patient, Savannah smile. And I could almost hear her. The way I always could. Calm and certain and just a little bit amused. I know, Harold. I have been telling you that for years. I set the photograph down gently. And for the first time in a very long time, I meant every word when I said, I am okay. I am actually really okay. Some people will eat every meal you cook for them and still tell you you are not giving enough. That is true. I lived it. I stood in a kitchen for 10 months, pouring love into plates that were pushed away and fixing things that were never acknowledged and calling it fine until fine collapsed under its own weight on a Tuesday evening in February. But here is what I did not know when this story started. The moment you stop cooking for people who do not taste what you are offering is the moment you find out exactly what your recipes are worth. And sometimes on a quiet street in Charleston, 12 minutes from downtown, with crepe myrtles and jasmine and a fence with a gap in it that was there before you arrived, you find someone who tastes every single thing you make and tells you, without a trace of flattery, you are not just a cook, you are a conversation. And sometimes, the conversation is just beginning. The Lord works in kitchens as much as He works in churches. I believe that. He puts the right ingredients in front of you, at the right time, and trusts you to know what to do with them. He sat me down on Bayberry Lane when I had forgotten what my own cooking tasted like. He put Vivian Price on the other side of a fence with a gap in it and a cat named after a writer and an opinion about everything. And he reminded me, through beef stew and bourbon and a bowl handed over wooden planks, that the recipe does not expire. It just needs the right kitchen. I thank him for that. I thank him for Diane, who taught me that love is a meal you make with patience. I thank him for the strength to leave a table where I was not wanted, and the grace to set a new one where I was. If this story reached somewhere behind your sternum, the way Vivian's words reached mine, then I have done my job. Not as a chef, as a storyteller. And I am grateful you stayed with me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me about the meal that changed your life. We all have one. And do not forget to subscribe, because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them is worth a seat at the table. Harold Sutter, 68 years old, retired chef, and finally, completely, entirely, home.